This is an update to a story I shared about 4 years ago on an internet website. In fact, what happened was a direct result of my posting it. I've since removed it, but I need to tell you what happened to me. God. Don't worry about the first story, you'll learn about it when I tell you this one. Let's get this party started. So, a little bit about me. I'm 41 years old and work as a salesman at a store that specializes in men's business suits. The job makes pretty good money, but with alimony to my ex-wife and child support on top of that, I seem to just barely get by. 6 months before this incident, I had just finished going through the panic of divorce. I had started drinking and lustfully looking at sleeping pills bottles and razor blades. I know what you're thinking, but I've always been too shy for such things. Though I must say, it has always appeared attractive, especially after losing everything. Anyway, as you can understand, I had been feeling fairly down for a few weeks, so I was pleasantly pleased when this elegant, attractive woman my age walked into the store and started showing me some interest. She was tall and thin, dressed in a charcoal jacket and skirt with her hair dyed a bronze amber. And she had a really unassuming smile, free of laugh wrinkles and crow's feet. I admit I had seen her before she approached me. I had noticed her as soon as she walked through the door. I wasn't going to tell her I thought she looked familiar. Telling a strange lady she looks familiar has to be the most blatant pickup line in the world. Anyway, she approached me with this sly smile, barely showing a glimpse of perfect white teeth, and said, "You probably think I'm in the wrong store." I laughed a little, cleared my throat and said, "I'm sorry." "Of course, this is a men's clothing store," she said. Her eyes were deep dark, nearly black, and lively and active when she looked up at me. "All right, ma'am," I said. "We do have several women pantsuits and jackets if you want me to show you." "Ma'am," she asked playfully, "do I look that old to you?" I giggled nervously, breaking eye contact and clearing my throat once again. I must have appeared like a schoolboy. I then told her not to worry, that she didn't appear old, and that I was only being respectful. Widening her smile, her long purple fingernails fidgeted with her purse strap. "Well," she answered softly and seriously, "I'm actually here to look for a suit for my son. He wants to wear a tuxedo to prom." My brow wrinkled. It was the middle of winter. Proms are typically held in June or late May at the earliest. "I know," she answered, seeing my expression. "His school is impossible. They want to hold it early so that the students don't get too distracted from their studies. My kid is likewise too busy with computer games to go buy a suit and is too embarrassed to come with me, so here I am." I couldn't help but smile excitedly. Just my luck, I thought. I showed her some of our best-selling items. She gave me her son's size and measurements, and we worked together to find something he'd appreciate. I could smell her sweet scent the entire time she was standing next to me. It was soothing, and I'll confess that I didn't try to distance myself from her. I told her as I was ringing her up at the cash register that if anything didn't quite fit, she could bring it back in and we'd gladly have it adjusted to fit her son. She laughed quietly, almost inaudibly, and told me I didn't have to worry about it. We started talking because there were no other customers in the store and the other cashier was on break. She asked what I did for fun in my spare time, and I paused, remembering the rows of empty booze bottles in my apartment and the sleeping pills next to the bathtub. Instead of answering her question, I took advantage of the situation and asked her if she wanted to go out for a drink later that evening. She didn't say anything, but tilted her head and studied me with her seductive, wondering eyes. "When do you get off work?" she said quietly. "At 7 o'clock, I blurted out. "If it isn't too late for you." "No," she said, a bright smile flashing over her supple red lips. That's perfect. I know a bar in this neighborhood. I'll be waiting for you out front. Excellent, I replied. What was your name again? Amy. Amy, I said again, extending my hand. My name is Alex, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Naturally. That seemed to put my nagging sense of déjà vu to rest. I'd never met an Amy, let alone an Andrea. But the name seemed appropriate, and I rolled each syllable over my tongue, waiting for the hours of my shift to pass. We were done by 6:30 p.m. Jane, the cashier, was balancing the register while I entered the day's transactions into the books. I couldn't keep my hold on the pencil as I wrote down the total debits and credits. I realize how pathetic this may seem, but it had been a long time since I had been involved with a woman in any form. Being older and just divorced, it was difficult to gather the courage to begin dating again. It was dark by 7 p.m. Jane stepped out and waved as I closed the front door. A tiny blue station wagon sat by the curb in front of the walkway. It wasn't particularly elegant, but I wasn't going to complain. I looked through the passenger side window and saw Amy peering out at me, her hooded eyes meeting mine, that slight smile drawn across her face. When I walked in, I was struck by how cold it was. There didn't appear to be any heat, and the radio wasn't even turned on. Strange, I thought. But she might live nearby. As she walked out of the plaza and into the street, I told her about the tuxedo I had sold her and how most people had been quite pleased with it. She didn't answer and was no longer smiling. But I didn't give it much thought. After all, she was the one behind the wheel. It is necessary to maintain concentration. The only thing that struck me as weird was that woman was driving with her purse on her lap. I was glad not to have to ride the bus after having to sell my car as a result of the divorce, so I just leaned back in my seat and relaxed. That's why, despite her told me this bar was nearby, I didn't realize we'd been on the road for a long time. I realized something was wrong when she entered a highway interchange. I stared at her, confused. Did you say it was out of town? I asked. Open the glove box, she screamed. I was shocked by the immediate change in her tone of voice. I followed orders. I reached out my shaking hand and pressed the lock button. The compartment door slid open, allowing hundreds of pages of paper to pour out. They were all lying at my feet. She gave me a brief glance down and told me to read the stapled sheets printed on red paper. I took them up and immediately knew what it was, my Stalker story, which I had posted to an internet website for real horror stories. I finally realized out who she was, Alicia Moretti. The mentally ill girl who stalked me at my home and at work while I was in my late teens. I begged her, but all she did was scream at me to read it, her eyes back on the road, but the gun still pointed on me. I followed her orders. My words said it all, how she'd walk into the coffee shop where I worked, how her hair was always matted and oily, how her clothing were always in tatters, how she smelled like BO and Vaseline. Everything was there, how she had came in every morning, how she knew my schedule and when my shift started. My coworkers said she'd come in on my days off and ask where I was. How she had been waiting for me in my house one night. I tried but couldn't swallow. I was trembling, and the printed out sheets unintentionally slipped from my shaky hands. She looked over at me, I could see her out of the corner of my eye, and directed me to take up the following set of pages, which were printed on gray paper. I begged her once again to let me go, but she screamed for me to read it. I picked them up, not knowing what was written on them. Then I noticed these were comments people had left on my story post. Comments like, "What a crazy bitch," or "I'd have been so terrified out by that cow," or "I'd still whack it." By the time I recognized what this was, tears were flowing down my cheeks. She discovered my story, recognized it, and came looking for me. please," I begged her, tearing up after reading all the comments and realizing her intention. "I had no idea that would offend you so much. I never used your full name." "Do you think it matters?" she said, her voice breaking. All the previous sophistication and sensuality had disappeared, like a beast roaring at me. I knew the story was about me, about a point in my life that I was embarrassed of. She began to hesitate. She sounded as if she was sobbing. When I stared at her, her mouth hung wide, as if in a mute scream, and her eyes squeezed shut. She was in tears too. After a horrifying moment, she coughed, tossed back her hair, and regained her cool. Close inspection revealed smudges of mascara under her eyes. She then ordered me to open her purse. Of course, I wasn't going to do that. "I'm not going to shoot you if you do exactly what I say." She said it calmly but unevenly. The voice sounded like the manic desperation of the girl who had annoyed me all those years before. I nodded slightly and immediately turned to look out the window. It was becoming dark now, and there were just a few cars on the road. I leaned over and slipped my hand in her purse, being careful not to brush up against the gun. Inside, I found what appeared to be a collection of Polaroids. My skin turned cold as I imagined these were possibly pictures of me that she had taken without my knowledge. I pulled them out and checked them. They weren't even photos of me. The first picture was of a couple standing outside a wedding chapel, the woman glowing in a white lace dress and the attractive mustachioed man next to her in a black tuxedo and cummerbund. They were hugging each other and holding hands. I scrolled down to saw the same couple kissing with their eyes closed, the sun setting above a beautiful ocean behind them. As I looked through the photos, I noticed a woman laying in a hospital bed, covered by dark green surgical blankets and holding a newborn baby. The child was wrapped in a blanket, and the husband smiled as he stood by them. I went through the photos and came on one of the couple and their two preteen children sitting on a beach in jean shorts and brightly colored shirts, smiling up into the camera's view. I suddenly discovered these pictures were of her, Alicia. She was married and had a family. Or if they had a family. But what was this had to do with me? "I don't understand," I whispered. She just gave me a sidelong look and didn't say anything. When I looked out the window, I noticed that there were no lights on the side of the road. There was nothing beyond the shoulder but tall trees and desolate countryside. We were now distant, far from any large city or town. I considered going into my coat for my phone, but I knew if I did, she would shoot me. Then I wondered why she hadn't just killed me already if that was her intention. In that car, minutes felt like hours. The darkness beyond the roadside appeared to extend on forever, like if I'd awoken in hell. She finally spoke after who knows how long. "It took me 10 years, she explained, her voice strained and quavering like the insane girl I remembered. "It took 3 years for me to get over you. And 7 more to forgive myself. I tried counseling and therapy. I finally accepted to take the medication. You see, I have paranoid schizophrenia. It runs in my family, but it didn't show itself in me until about 5 months before I met you. My parents were divorcing. Dr. Walter informed me that was most likely what caused my breakdown. Then, when I saw you, it was as if you were waiting for me. My therapist believes I was using you as a misplaced source of love and stability that I believed had been ripped from me by my parents' divorce. I mistaken your politeness and charm for love and devotion since you were always there and always so polite. I'm not sure why, but I didn't feel terrified at the moment. I just felt sadness and depressed. We often call people crazy, but when we literally hear the medical terminology, it becomes a lot less distant. Much more real. So for 10 years after you, I avoided people, she said. I didn't see any of my friends. I hardly ever spoke to my parents, and I never went on dates. First and foremost, because I was still completely in love with you. Then because I felt embarrassed. I was ashamed and scared that I would turn into the deeply attached crazy that I had been with you. I wanted to call you and apologize several times, but my counselor and Dr. Walter were sure that it would be a bad idea. They predicted that I would relapse. So I was alone for 10 years, hating myself. I then met Dave. Dave was a university graduate student studying physical geography. He was the one who contacted me first. We met at a bar, or perhaps a restaurant. My parents had insisted on taking me out for my birthday, and he had directed the waiter to put our bill to his card. She then laughed softly, a tear running down her cheek. He hardly had enough money for his drink and wanted to pay for a complete family's dinner only to talk to me. We started as friends, but at his insistence, we evolved into something more. I loved him and immediately felt better. I finally felt good enough to go back to school and finish my degree. We married soon after he graduated. We were pretty stable because he'd been hired at a consultant position. I eventually forgiven myself and forgot about you. But I didn't tell him. Never. Aaron was born a year after our marriage, and Cassandra was born 2 years later. We were both happy. I was happy. I was hired as a typist at a law company. It wasn't much, but it gave me something to do when the kids left for school. I like working there since everyone was friendly and helpful. One day, Mike, one of the law firm's facility support staff members, was telling me this website he regularly visits, usually to search at funny pictures. He told me about this page with scary stories and creepy experiences, and I instantly recognized the most of the stories. I went through all of the posts, and it didn't take long for me to find one that seemed familiar. Too familiar. I knew it was you who posted it. She came to a halt and sighed heavily, her watery eyes rolling up and her stare fixed on the car roof. She seemed as though she couldn't believe she was telling me this. Her voice had changed from that of a nervous psycho to that of a crying, sad lady. The shadow lay heavy inside the car, over both of us. My paranoia and anxiety increased after that, she added. I attempted to resist it by boosting the amount of my medicine, but it didn't work. I eventually gave up because they just appeared to make me sleepy. She then let out another sad little laugh, as if she'd caught herself in a lie. You know, I believe Dave left me because he saw the post, and that's why I couldn't even get joint custody of the kids, but that's not true. The fact is that seeing your post caused me to act erratically. I began having fits, fighting with him for no reason, screaming at the kids and beating them for things that weren't their fault. I had stopped sleeping at night because I was certain that our next-door neighbors were spying on us and planning to break in and take everything. Dave left because of me, and I acted that way because of your post. I was looking out the window now. I could see wide fields in the distance with barely a sprinkling of bush. Where was she taking me? I just couldn't forgive myself, she said. I know I never will. How did you find me? I grumbled. She gave me a nasty smile, amused by my discomfort. One of my firm's criminal lawyers, Mikkel Corson, has a team of private detectives. I do paperwork for him, so I faked a document requesting that one of the members of staff find you. It didn't take long for me to figure out your full name, where you used to work, and where you grew up. Of course, I was amazed that you were still living there after all these years. Her smile had turned sour and sarcastic. That, along with her previous remark, caused me to glance aside, a little confused. Of course, when Mikkel found out, I was fired. Misappropriation of company resources, It didn't help that I was already on shaky ground for obvious reasons. The road we'd been driving on had deteriorated into a bumpy path of scruffy concrete. It felt as if we had traveled back in time to a time when there was nothing but dirt and jungle. I began to fear that if we continued driving, the road would come to an end and we'd be stuck in the desert. Regardless, she continued driving, the car shaking and lurching across the rough pavement. When I looked at the dash clock, the green numbers showed 12:03. We'd been on the road for many hours. Another hour went by with nothing. Nothing except silence. I began to absorb what she had said and felt a weight build in the pit of my stomach. This was entirely my fault. I had destroyed her life. And for what? A little attention on an internet forum? Jesus, the incident hadn't taken up much of my time, and for God's sake, she was crazy. The whole thing looked sleazy, and I was no longer terrified. I wasn't scared at all. I simply wanted it to be over. She slowed down by 1:15. We pulled over on a gravel side next to a large, empty field, the car parked perpendicular to the road. When she turned off the engine, her headlights went off, and everything beyond the windshield went dark. My eyes adjust, and I can just make out the black form of the field against the lighter shade of the starless night sky. We were both sitting there, not looking at each other, like though we'd just fucked for money. She didn't move or stir. The gun was still pointed at me. I'm sorry, I apologized. My tone was hushed and regretful. I admit that what I did was wrong. When I met you, you were at your most vulnerable, and it was wrong for me to take advantage of you, even years later. She didn't even look at me or move. But I knew she was listening. Go ahead, I asked her. Shoot me. I deserve to be hurt. I deserve to die. I don't want to live anymore anyway. She adjusted in her seat, still looking out into the field in front of us. No, she responded quietly. You deserve to feel the same way I do every day. I then heard the hammer click backwards and watched as she opened her perfect mouth and inserted the barrel. I screamed and jumped at her, but bang! There was a flash, and I noticed spots. My ears were ringing and blocked, as if I were underwater. My eyes adjusted after about a minute. Then, stupidly, I started, shocked by the sight of the woman's damaged face laying next to me in the car. Her blood had covered the interior. My hand searched in vain for the door handle, which I eventually found, and I slid out into the pebbled ground from the passenger side. I went down on my hands and knees and puked. I doubled over in dry heat for several minutes after standing up. I walked the road from there, not thumbing, not seeking to go home, just trying to get as far away from Amy Alicia as possible. By sunrise, someone in a rusty truck had come over and asked if I wanted a lift. I approached his passenger side window, still scared and exhausted. Once I was a foot away from his truck, I watched his face become pale, his pupils shrink in their sockets, and he grabbed the gear stick, changed into drive, and drove away. I looked down at my clothes as I looked at the passing car. Of course, I was covered in blood. I removed my jacket and shirt, wiped off my face, and then threw them, walking the rest of the way in only my undershirt and pants. Someone picked me up around 2 hours later and took me to the next major city. I then boarded a bus home and called in sick to work. Update: 2 police officers arrived to my house about a week after the incident. They asked about my relationship to the dead, Alicia Moretti-Lippman, and I told them the entire story. They informed me that Google Map printouts of my address and a PI file with my name had been discovered at the scene. They attempted to convince me to accompany them downtown, but I refused and called a lawyer. My new lawyer, Mr. Mikkel Corson, who decided to represent me pro bono, told me there was no way a murder charge could be brought against me. The proof of suspected foul play is little. My explanation, although incredible, makes sense. And the cops would prefer to write off her death as a suicide than spend countless man-hours and overtime investigating a homicide. Corson suggested me to a better divorce lawyer, and I was able to have my payment lowered and more time with my kids. I also joined AA, where I started to overcome my self-destructive thoughts and behavior. Don't misunderstand me. I'm heartbroken over what happened to Alicia. And her final words stayed with me. But, I mean, how far does guilt get you? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a like and share it with your friends. We would love to know your view about the story in the comments. Follow and contact us on our social media accounts if you have a story to share with us or what kind of stories you want in the future. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification bell to not miss any future video. Thanks for watching until next time.